Good afternoon. I'm Juliane Kempfield. I'm the director of Deutsches Haus at NYU. Thank you so much for the first panel of our two-day conference, which starts today, Germany, an inventory of the now. And the panel you are in currently is creativity in times of COVID. We have a wonderful panel constellation with Marion Brasch, Annekatrin Hendel, Florian Reischauer, Noah Isenberg, and Jörg Häntzschel. Welcome to the digital Deutsches Haus at NYU. We're also delighted that Yasemin Pamuk, the head of cultural affairs and science at the Consulate General of Germany, has agreed to provide a Grußwort opening remarks for our panel. Before we start, let me thank a few people and institutions. I, of course, want to thank our wonderful speakers who are here from Berlin, Munich, Austin, and New York for making time in their schedule to join us and to share their thoughts with us. I would like to thank my great team, especially Sarah, Adriana, and Nicole, also Christian, for their tireless work behind the scenes to make this entire conference possible. I would like to thank the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, for their continued support of our academically inclined programs. And thank you, the audience, for being here today. I know it's in the middle of the day and it's gotten difficult with the speakers in different time zones to navigate scheduling. But thanks for being here. And as we are recording this event, a lot of people who've let us know that they can't make it because of the timing will be able to join us later. So thanks everybody for agreeing for this event to be recorded. Let me just mention the other events in the conference. We have an event at 3 p.m., The Rise of the Far Right. And tomorrow we have two more panels centering the margins and a look ahead that you might want to visit. We have stellar speakers for all of them, and I think all topics are of a very timely nature, and we're delighted that we can present them. I also want to point out a literary event on the horizon for December 14th. It's called Upended and will feature an Austrian, Swiss, and German author in conversation with an American author, Jonas Lüscher, Sascha Marianne Salzmann, Andrea Grill, in conversation with Monique Truong, and moderated by Tess Lewis in cooperation with the Festival Neue Literatur partner organizations. Okay, so that's the end of the shameless self-promotion, and now I will get going in a more precise way and introduce the event, and very briefly introduce our speakers so that we may not take up too much of your time. We'll post the complete biographical information of the speakers in the Q&A section. So, and of course, it's also on our website. All right, so here we go. The COVID-19 pandemic has had an enormously challenging impact on all areas of our lives. It has changed the way we work, learn, teach, the way we interact with each other, share and socialize, how we create, collaborate, and celebrate. This panel of artists, authors, filmmakers, and journalists will engage in an international cultural dialogue in which they will examine how the pandemic has impacted the realms of art and culture. And perhaps they will also speculate on what our cultural landscapes might look like when this is over. All right, and now let me briefly introduce our speakers, and I'll start with Marion. Marion's family novel, Ab jetzt ist Ruhe, was published in 2012 and was followed by 3 more novels and several short stories since then. But Marion isn't only an author, she's also a radio journalist, and she is based in Berlin. Jörg Häntzschel has been working for Süddeutsche Zeitung since 1998, initially from London, then until 2012 as a cultural correspondent here in New York. But now he's an editor in the Süddeutsche Zeitung's feature section, the German feuilleton, and he is based in Munich. In 2014, Annekatrin Hendel founded the Berlin-based film production company It Works Medien with an exclamation point, The award-winning company has produced almost 30 films, including most recently Expulsion into Paradise, Beauty and Decay, and the Brasch family. And Marion, of course, was the main subject of the Brasch family. And I have very fond memories of this being shot here in New York while you were both in town. That was one of my favorite things that ever happened during my work life here. Florian is also a good friend of Deutsches Haus. It's a little bit of an like alumna meeting we have here today. He's an Austrian photographer based in Berlin. For the past 10 years, he's been working on the beautiful project Pieces of Berlin, which he will share some insights from as part of his presentation. By portraying and interviewing Berliners, he provided deep insights into the daily life of the metropolis and documents its rapid changes. And last but not least, our moderator, Noah. Noah always has complicated titles. Even though you switch jobs, you're still making my life miserable with your titles and affiliations, but here we go. Noah is the George Christian Centennial Professor and Chair of the Department at Radio, Television, Film at the University of Texas at Austin. He's the author of We'll Always Have Casablanca, the life, legend, and afterlife of Hollywood's most beloved movie, also called Such Much. And Edgar G. Ulmer, a filmmaker at the margins. So please welcome our panelists. And now it's my pleasure to hand things over to Yasemin for her Grußwort. You have the floor.
Thank you, Juliane. Hello to everybody. Distinguished panel speakers, dear guests, liebe Juliane Kampfield, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the German Consulate General New York, I am delighted to welcome you to the web talk, Creativity in Times of COVID, hosted by the Deutsches Haus at NYU and funded by the German Academic Exchange Service, DAAD, from funds of the German Federal Foreign Office. So much to the official introduction. As the world is undergoing multiple waves of the COVID-19 outbreak, we experience a continued crisis with substantial consequences for public health, economy, and society. Countries like the United States and Germany are now on the verge of partly or fully shuttering their economies and lock down public life again. For most of us, social distancing, restrictions on mobility, as well as remote ways of working and communicating have become, some claim, the new normal. We all feel the repercussions of the pandemic. The art and culture community, however, are among the hardest hit. Creative thinkers and makers have lived through sweeping changes as events were cancelled and cultural calendars wiped clean with an instant. And the pandemic's repercussions on the cultural and creative sectors are not even fully unwound yet. The cultural infrastructure in Germany, for example, by no means only consists of public or publicly funded cultural institutions, but also of a series of private and commercially oriented cultural enterprises. In total, more than 1.5 million people draw their income and livelihood from the cultural sector. While the public cultural institutions are likely to survive, at least up to a certain point, the privately organized initiatives and individually self-employed culture and creative makers are much more severely affected by the repercussions of the pandemic, and the risk that they will not survive is imminent. Thus, the simple approach, every crisis has its opportunities, falls short. Less than an opportunity, Corona is a challenge and proving ground, not only for civil society, but in particular for government and public policy. These extraordinary times, therefore, call for substantial ways of making the unique voice of art and artists heard again. In response to this challenge, in July 2020, the German Bundestag, the German parliament, passed a supplementary budget in support of the country's cultural infrastructure. Under the header Neustart Kultur, you could translate it Jumpstarting Culture, the special funding program has a volume of 1 trillion euros and was set up exclusively in support of the culture sector. It adds to existing cultural funding programs at the level of the Bundesländer, the German states, as well as the emergency aid available to self-employed artists, creative thinkers, and makers. Germany commemorates its 30th anniversary of unity this year. Our country is usually credited with both a successful democratization after the horrors of the National Socialistic regime, as well as the strong economic performance. Cultural factors have received less attention, although the works of creative thinkers and makers such as Günter Grass, Heinrich Böll, Joseph Beuys, Rainer Werner Fassbinder have been celebrated worldwide. In fact, the development of our country has drawn much credibility and legitimacy from its commitment to the concept of the Kulturstaat. This concept, alien to most Americans, puts forward the idea about the role and responsibility of governments in that it obliges the state in terms of its public and moral representation, as well as its active role in support of arts, education, and culture. Art and culture provide us with joy and inspiration. They also, however, provoke thought by giving critique to our political, economic, and social, as well as human condition. They offer freedom for the individual to develop and reflect on the values that bind the society together. This includes not only art and literature, but also ways of life, basic human rights, value systems, traditions, and beliefs. In times of Corona, where the public space is confined to remote virtual communication, facilitating and supporting discourse and interaction among a broad and engaged public, as well as the obligation to preserving and bringing back the unique voices of creative thinkers and makers, are more than essential. They are an essential obligation of governments and states. To tackle these challenges, however, it is not enough to work and think on the national level only. We require international exchange and cooperation across sectors and at all levels. Germany therefore believes that it is essential to make cultural exchange and cooperation an integral part of the transatlantic relationship, that is the relationship between Germany and the United States. Not only the United States, of course. In our efforts to suppose these important discussions on both sides of the Atlantic, the German Consulate General New York feels privileged to partner with culture institutions such as the Deutsches Haus at New York University. Since its founding in 1977, Deutsches Haus at NYU has provided New Yorkers with an outstanding forum for cultural, intellectual, and artistic exchange. Today's panel of distinguished artists, writers, and filmmakers is yet another example of this excellent and inspiring work. In supporting activities like this, we hope to develop a better response to global challenges and add value to both a more inclusive and comprehensive discourse, as well as a more prominent role of civil society in rethinking and developing better practices. I very much thank you, Juliane Kampfield, for this excellent and outstanding partnership, and I'm looking forward to continue it. But now, enough of me. I look forward to the panel discussion and have the pleasure to pass on the floor to Noah Isenberg, today's moderator. Noah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yasemin, for those kind words, and also for that very illuminating panoramic introduction. So thank you for that as well. We are going to proceed as follows. The four panelists will give a sort of short presentation of how the world looks from their respective vantage points. And then there will be time for some questions that I will raise. And then also I will be monitoring the Q&A here on this Zoom call, and we'll look for questions that come also from members of the audience. These past 9 months have been extremely challenging for artists, for writers, for photographers and filmmakers. And I'm very, very eager to hear from all of you. But what I will say just very briefly from Austin, Texas here is that in my department, we have some 1,000 undergraduate majors, close to 100 graduate students. And during these 9 months, they have managed to really rise to these challenges. And I have been extremely, extremely proud. We initially shut down student productions in the spring, but thanks to the help of my very imaginative colleagues. We've come up with some safety protocols that they have now been using, and student productions resumed this fall semester. Anyway, we are winding down the semester, and I just thought I would say at the outset that we are all doing what we can, I think, to meet these challenges. And I'm very eager to hear from today's 4 panelists just how they are approaching those challenges. We're going to begin with Florian Reischauer. And Florian, you also will be able to share your screen to give us some insight into what you're doing in the name of Pieces of Berlin. And then we will continue onward to Marion Brasch, to Jörg Häntzschel, and finally to Annekatrin Hendel. So that's going to be the order. And why don't we just move that way? I don't need to interject, or we'll just go straight from Florian to Marion to Jörg and to Annekatrin. Okay? So go ahead, Florian, please jump on in. You're muted, Florian.
Mute.
There you go.
Okay, here we go. Cool. Thanks so much for the invitation and also the introduction. Well, my main project, Pieces of Berlin, was actually, much affected by the pandemic and especially by the lockdown. My practice is basically about approaching strangers on the streets and interviewing them. So obviously pretty inappropriate method in those days, and also now again. Also, there were some events planned and everything was cancelled. There was actually only one online talk, which was still up. And like most of my commercial photo jobs were cancelled. And yeah, I ended up having quite a lot of time. And luckily, and a big thanks for that, Berlin Senate, they launched immediately at the very beginning an unbureaucratic emergency aid program for artists and freelancers. So I was not struggling with existential fears and the question how I should manage to cover the studio costs and so on within the next months. So that helped a lot to go forward. And yeah, it was a weird situation because I was so curious about how people feel around the city, but could not really encounter them the way I was used to. So yeah, at first I started to get in touch via email with Berliners I portrayed 10 years ago and started conversations about the changes and the current situation. That worked out actually pretty well, and some were really engaged. Beside that, I did a lot of networking. So I tried to shift everything online kind of, and what you can do indoors. So yeah, another big thing or another big step, what I was always like, it was time to do, definitely, was working on my archive. Yeah. So researching for a proper way of organizing all the negatives, all the data, working on archive concept strategies, finding out which information is important and have a long-term relevance, and how can I facilitate the usability of all that collected material. So, well, that was the one thing. And then during summer, there was actually more than a breath of normality back in Berlin. And I was also out for a couple of walks again, quizzing the Berliners. And so the question was, how do you find a respectful and courteous way to get into conversation with people after the lockdown? And yeah, is it possible wearing a mask, like having most of your face covered, and establishing a trustworthy encounter with a stranger? I don't know. I also felt very unsafe, not unsafe that way, unsecure, how this will turn out, or how everything will work now, after the first wave and after the first lockdown. So, but in the end, I was very surprised, and it was actually pretty easy. And most of the people I met, they were really talkative, and they really enjoyed having those conversations with me as a stranger and so on. And yeah, I think, and that was something what I experienced very often, also within the last 10 years while I was working on this project, that solitude or loneliness is like an important factor for people sharing thoughts, to somebody else, and to talk. So I've put together a couple of photos which I've taken this year, and I would like to ask, cool, it works. Thanks, Sarah. And I just want to go quick through them. There are some cityscapes from during the lockdown, and then some portraits from the summer. Here we go. This was the first couple I met. It was Marion and Hans Rainer. They had actually a pretty tough time. He's suffering from Alzheimer, and usually they have a caretaker who comes to visit them and to help them. But for I think it was more, 1 or almost 2 months, she had to care for him alone. And I met them when they were on their first walk around in the kids in the neighborhood, and they were like really happy. And then they said, we had just fries together, and it was one of the most beautiful things we had ever had after that time. This is Ali. He was very pessimistic about the situation and had like really concerns about the economic aftermath of the pandemic. So that was the main topic, and he was just like saying, I have no idea how future generations will deal with everything what happens now, kind of. And then we got Sabine. Sabine was one of those who really enjoyed the lockdown, because she just said, well, there are no tourists in the city and there's less cars and it's just fine. And I have a family who cares about me, brings me food and so on. So she enjoyed it very much. And then last but not least, I met Melly. She is an artistic dancer, and she had like all her events or like were cancelled. So she had to think about an alternative, about a new concept, and she started developing new concepts on one-to-one performances and offered them to galleries. And she said it worked out really well, and for her it was also like a very interesting period, because she was pushed to find new ways to develop new things. And so that was like a short quick recap of of the last months. That's it.
Thank you very much, Florian. Why don't we move on, and maybe we can come back to some questions at the end of Florian from me and perhaps also from the audience. But why don't we move on to Marion, please?
Yeah, hi. For me, this time, the time of the first shutdown in March, was actually not so much different than usual. As a writer, I'm used to work at home. Yes, some events and readings have been canceled, but I still had my job at the radio. So 4 to 8 times a month I could go to work, which means I had a show on weekdays, which was fine. So I could pay my rent, and all the fixed costs were took care of. Nevertheless, there was, of course, this uncertainty about how the pandemic would continue. I mean, I think everybody can share this feeling, but on the one hand, it was interesting because it reminded me a little bit of the time after the wall came down. I'm from East Berlin, from East Germany. It was exciting and fascinating in the first time, and because nobody knew how it would continue and how it would end. We still don't know how it will end. On the other hand, it was kind of an existential change we experienced. Yeah, it was, so there have been similarities to what I felt back then, at least emotionally, I think. Concerning my own creative work, I didn't really produce anything good. I didn't produce anything interesting because I was so distracted. You know, everybody, I think almost everybody was watching the news, absorbed by press conferences. Every press conference I watched, every press conference. In the beginning, like many others, I thought maybe this is the time of essential changes. There was the hope globally and socially that could be, that we could think of, you know, how could we change the society? Crisis as an opportunity. But that has changed. And from my opinion, it has changed to the good. Here you have all these demonstrations against the measures of the government. It's a crude mixture of critics, conspiracy ideologists, and right-wing extremists. So this frightens me a lot. So we don't think anymore, I think, or we don't think enough about how could we use this crisis to change the society to the good, you know. Yeah, and I know a lot of people, like Florian says, I know a lot of people which are really afraid of the future because they lost their jobs and they don't know how to you know, how to take care of the simplest things in their lives. So this is what I think. I did a little work, but I did this in the second wave during the last weeks. I did a little assignment work. I wrote a short story. This is everything I did creation-wise. So this is what I have to say.
That's not nothing, as they say, right? That's not nothing.
Okay. Yeah.
Nicht nichts. Anyway, thank you very much for that. And we move on now to Jörg Häntzschel.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me, Juliane and Noah. Thanks for the introduction. Like Juliane said, I'm a journalist. I write for the art section of Süddeutsche Zeitung, a big newspaper in Germany. So how did Corona affect my work? I've been working here from home since the beginning of March. I've only been to the office 3 times since then, and only to pick up books or a computer or something. Of course, we have daily conferences like everybody else, but it's it's surprising how easy it is to produce a newspaper like this with everybody not in the office. But like for everybody else, a lot of things get sort of fall by the wayside. Discussions with colleagues, decision making becomes sort of opaque. You never know why things are happening. You feel out of the loop. And then, but that's for everybody, I guess. But what concerned us a lot was that, of course, that it was the fact that a lot of the things that we usually write about, theater, movies, concerts, etc., they were simply not there anymore. So that was weird. But since, as Juliane pointed out at the beginning, the German arts section, it has a bit of a different concept from that of in the American newspaper. So we also publish a lot of essays and sort of general pieces. So Corona itself became kind of our biggest subject over the summer. Obviously, we had kind of a pandemic diary. That's what we called it. We asked writers from all over the world to to tell us what the situation was like in their countries. You know, and then it was all about how can you move performances to the internet, how is streaming affecting the arts, etc. And another thing was the question, basically, you know, under what conditions could we get out of this situation? So could orchestras perform again? How much, sort of the technicalities really of it? You know, how much distance between each seat in a concert hall or something? How many people can be allowed into a theater? Things like that. And basically that went on and sort of led to the question of how will artists and arts institutions survive? And that has been basically the topic for the whole last months. Basically, it really came down to what kind of role do the arts play in society. You know, there were questions like, for example, when all the stores are closed, shouldn't bookstores at least stay open? Are they really the same as kind of a you know, like an electronic store or something? Or when you have churches open, shouldn't exhibitions be open as well? Or do arts institutions really belong to the same group with gyms and swimming pools and even brothels, as was currently or until recently the case? Or do they have, or are they more like sort of secular, sacred spaces that have, you know, that enjoy certain privileges? Are the arts essential for life, like food or oxygen, or is it more like, you know, a luxury for the good times? And there was a lot of debate about that, I guess, as there was in the United States. But it was all sort of influenced, of course, by the question of how much, you know, where do these aid programs that my fellow panelists have also mentioned already, where do these aid, you know, who's being helped by the government, who deserves what is essential and what is, you know, everybody's own sort of problem. So some of these aid programs were like really generous, like Florian already mentioned. My brother is a graphic designer in Berlin. Within like, it was like the third week or something, he just got 5,000 euros. You know, I couldn't believe it, from the city of Berlin. It was really miraculous. But then others, of course, haven't received anything, or they were somehow didn't really fit into the categories, like who's an artist, who's a freelancer, who's, you know, where does it end? Do people who work like, you know, caterers, people who work in the kind of, you know, how do you, workers in the theater, but not performers, but people who work somewhere, stage hands, people like that. Do they all deserve the same money as the actual artists do, or not? So that was a difficult debate, which is not resolved at all yet. And the thing is that basically what happens is that, as Juliane pointed out at the beginning, most of, not all, but a lot of the public, a lot of the arts institutions are subsidized or funded publicly. And the thing is that, surprisingly, those are doing just fine. I mean, it doesn't matter if you have visitors, if you have like 100,000 visitors in a museum or nobody, they get exactly the same money. Others, like you know, privately run concert venues, independent theaters, etc., they have a much harder time. So I think many people are afraid that basically these often complacent and pretty well-funded arts institutions in Germany will come out even stronger than before. It will be kind of like the state or the public role in the arts, I think, will be even stronger at the end than before. while sort of individual artists and small places will have a much harder time. You know, there's a new museum in Berlin that's just where they just kind of broke ground. It costs 500 million euros. It seemed extravagant already before, but they just go ahead and fund that. So it's, you know, I guess for Americans that sounds like totally wonderful, but it's also really problematic. And if I can, I'd like to quickly say something about what Marion said before, because I've very much felt the same way. There was this sense of a, I guess, unlike from the situation in New York, where there were the sirens all day and people were dying at a terrible rate. In Germany, it was relatively, you know, it was okay, as you know. I mean, comparatively. So the first wave, like the March and April, felt like a big social experiment, and I think there was even sort of a religious undercurrent there. Marion mentioned it. There was a sense of we're sort of what's the term, like before Easter, when you don't drink alcohol, etc.
Lent.
Yeah,
Lent is the name. Yeah.
Like you basically you pay a little bit for your excess of the past, you know, for all the crazy things you've done, and it'll hopefully get better afterwards. And there was the idea that somehow this has a meaning, and that everybody staying at home will sort of serve a greater good, and there will be some kind of I don't know, a new start afterwards on better, healthier, sort of more sustainable terms. And of course that sort of went away. It sort of evaporated over the summer as everybody was relaxing. And now with the second wave, there's really nothing of that left. And I think it officially ended when, I mean, for me at least, when Trump got infected, and then 3 days later he came out healed miraculously. So that was kind of, for me, that was sort of the last chance that somehow there was some sort of significance over that. So unfortunately, I think it didn't make any sense, this whole thing. There was no lesson really learned. And I think that's what the hard part is, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the arts scene in Germany. I just want to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jörg. Yeah, I was always wondering who was the screenwriter for the Trump COVID case. I haven't found out who scripted that one. Annekatrin Hendel, you're on. You have the microphone.
Yes. Thank you that I can be here. I'm a producer and a film director, and I know that unlikely many other places in the world, I talk about luxus various, I think. I'm a producer and director, and I have always continuously made 2 films every year for 15 years. And in Germany, the first lockdown, yes, it was for me, like Marion, not so difficult because I know a very strong moments as East German woman. And Berlin is a crazy city like New York, and just you don't notice the partial lockdown at the moment, although the clubs, the museums, the cinemas, and the restaurants, you know it, are closed, but yes, the city is full and crazy with masks and so on. It's for me very interesting because I have an office in Berlin, for filmmaking, but I live in a village. And in the first lockdown, I was only in this village, and just now often too. And if I go in the city, what's many people, and it's for me very interesting. I think, also, yes. I think that the coronavirus actually points for the filmmaker problems that are already there anyway. And that's especially concerns the importance of cinema in Germany, I think. The future of the cinema is not only in question at this moment, but in this moment especially. Yes, and it's for my colleagues a very, very, very big problem, I think, for yes, not only for the filmmakers, for the distributors, the cinemas and so on. It's a very, very bad situation. Yes, as an artist, for me, I'm doing well. I have already started a very personal film in the first lockdown with title Expulsion in Paradise. In this film, Noah, you must help me.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Das ist nicht Therapie, das ist selbst, also das ist Flucht.
Mm-hmm.
Also
so it's not so much therapy as it is a refuge, right? A flight.
Yes. And in this film, I don't point the camera outwards as usual, but inwards. My family members let me do this because I was always in very bad mood. My mood was very bad. With all other projects, some of them big movies, I have great difficulties in financing and in shooting and so on. It's very difficult in every aspect. In the first lockdown, my colleagues was still there was still a great acceptance among, but a lot of them can't work at all. Many of them have a kind of depression at the moment in November, the November depression, but not only the November depression. They feel towards to banks and the car industry and football, and I'm afraid that these negative feelings will increase, and I see quite black, although I actually don't have much to complain about. Can you understand me? My very
wonderful
bad
expression
English.
to see black, Anne. Yes. It's a wonderful expression, yes. But English just means to be pessimistic. Be quite pessimistic. In German, you say schwarze.
Yes, but I think whining doesn't help. Only wine, I think. I don't know, but it's and a cigarette.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm
fair enough.
Yeah,
I think that's a good pairing in these times of crisis, no doubt. I'm curious if I may interject. Is it okay for me to interject? Because I want to ask something to all of you, if that's possible. Whether in the face of these challenges, whether it was during the first lockdown or now during this most recent lockdown that you're experiencing on the other side of the Atlantic, whether there have been certain networks that have established, support groups, whether it was in your case, Anne, whether it was filmmakers, collaborators who helped to kind of prop up your spirits a bit. Florian mentioned early on the different funding sources, which for Americans, that's just utterly unthinkable that there would be that kind of generosity. Jörg mentioned his brother, the graphic designer, who suddenly, as if, the money fell from the sky like the Coke bottle and the gods must be crazy. And for your work too, Marion, whether it's at the radio or whether it's as a writer, whether there are networks, solidarity groups, whether there's any sort of sense of greater solidarity as a result of this pandemic. And let me just add one last thing, and so for comparative framework here. On this side, one of the things that the pandemic did was to lay bare the racial and economic inequities in America. These existed prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic really cast a kind of unforgiving and glaring light on those inequities. And I'm curious whether on your side of the Atlantic, whether some of these inequities have maybe also then led to the forms of solidarity. As we saw, for instance, in this case here in the US, Black Lives Matter, people galvanizing support and protesting against police brutality, for instance, just to take one salient example. But I'm curious about, from your vantage point and also from your respective professions, whether there have been other kinds of, whether it's political solidarity, whether it's professional solidarity, kinds of networks that have taken root during this difficult and terribly challenging period. Didn't mean for that to be so long-winded. That's what academics do. We give these very, very long-winded, raise very long-winded questions. And I don't know who would maybe like to take. We can go around the group if it's possible and see whether maybe Anne, you seem to. Was it? Yeah. Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, I'm a member of the management board of the German Film Academy, and this is a great network for us filmmaker, and it's meine Leidenschaft, wie sagt man?
My passion.
My passion to bring the people together, and we have Zoom conferences and so on, and we talk together. But I don't know, is the solidarity very big? I don't know.
But at least the conversation is taking place, right? At least
the conversation is very important.
Academy.
Yeah. Yes, it's very important, the conversation, but it's only a conversation, and I don't know just now the direction, I think. Yes, I can't feel it. It's very difficult. Yes.
Yeah, I think we're all experiencing some of that, not knowing where we're going next. And what about with vaccination? Will that suddenly make it possible for us to have these kinds of encounters that we have been deprived of for the past 9 months? That a lot of those unanswered questions, those are still circulating around us. Maybe others wanted to take a kind of a swing at this one, respond to this question of solidarity, networking, things of that nature.
For me, maybe I talk for the radio because I don't know anything about solidarity between writers. Maybe I didn't experience something like that. But for the radio, I experienced something really beautiful. We changed our program and focused very much about the problems of the listeners. So we would do talk radio. We talk to artists, to club people, to event, freelance sound engineers, artists that lost their who lost their jobs, and so we fulfilled actually the sense of radio. We brought the people together talking about their problems. So that was something wonderful I experienced. I don't know anything about solidarity between writers, because writers, I think everybody sits on their desk and writes, tries to create something. So maybe there was something, but I don't know anything about this. But the radio thing was really hopeful for me. It was a great experience.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. The writers, by contrast, maybe it's a much more solitary enterprise, and so
Yeah.
that's
Right.
and that's in talking about. It's funny. I had a conversation with my dissertation advisor who said that he'd basically been sheltering in place his whole life because he's a scholar and he's been so accustomed to this. It's those people who are more accustomed to living in a very, very social environment that's what's difficult, I think. And maybe Florian, you were talking about this, if I can come back to you, about the work that you do as an artist in your Pieces of Berlin project, even being able to establish a rapport with the people that you speak with on the street is extremely difficult to do when your face is covering. You mentioned how you felt a bit insecure was the word that you used.
Because basically when you get in touch with somebody you don't know, and because I want something from them, I want a story, I want a photo, then it happens in between, I don't know, a second or whatever, or less than a second, that you to establish this trust, that the person is trusting you and is taking part in it. And like I said before, actually it was pretty easy to manage that. And some people were really relieved kind of to have the possibility to talk somebody, that having stayed at home the last 2 months and talking with somebody on the phone or whatever, but not meeting somebody and talking real life. And about solidarity, at the very beginning, so when I started doing those interviews again after the first lockdown, the first wave, many people talked about solidarity, and they said, and that was also what I experienced, that there was this hope that there will be a sustainable solidarity which is created by this crisis. But after a while, unfortunately, it felt that it wasn't that sustainable. It vanished pretty quick. We had, for example, I would call it, I don't know, neighborhood solidarity, that young folks were taking care of older people, hanging out sheets of paper where they left their phone number and offering going for shopping and stuff like this, that they can stay at home and things like this. And but even also in a professional field, I also have experienced that there was solidarity within photographers. If there is a job that they know about and they can do it or whatever, they call you and so on. And I think it changed a lot within the last months. And now, for example, if I would talk about right now, I don't see this solidarity anymore, fortunately.
Yeah, we're at a different place than we were in the early phase, the first phase. You reminded me when you were talking about the sort of neighborhood solidarity, neighborhood support. I sheltered in place with my family very close to where Juliane lives, in another neighborhood in Brooklyn. And every evening at 7 o'clock, you would put your head out of your apartment window and would bang on pots and pans and clap for the healthcare workers. This was during a time when, hundreds of people were dying each day in New York City.
It's the same in Germany.
Yeah, same thing. Where people at 7 p.m., same tradition. And
it was 9 p.m.
Yeah, or 9 p.m. Has that passed though now? I mean, we did that during the first phase in New York, and then.
Yeah, that's over.
Yeah. And looking though toward the future, and it's very hard for us to kind of prognosticate that, but I'm wondering, Jörg, to your question of what constitutes a kind of secular but also sacred place, what should be given this sort of I won't call it papal dispensation, that's too religious, but some sort of, so if food stores are allowed to be open and churches are allowed to be open, why shouldn't a museum be allowed to open? And is this a debate that's taking place in Munich and Berlin and other cities? I know that there's been protests in the street, but those tend to be, sort of, Marion, you, I think, referred to them in your remarks about that they are, conspiracy driven and in some cases right-wing extremists. But I'm curious whether from the more level-headed, enlightened, so to speak, now side, whether people have been lobbying for those cultural institutions to regain a place now during this time of need for cultural sustenance, whether it's the bookstore, Jörg, that you cited before, whether it's a museum or an art gallery or something. So could you speak to that a bit more, if you would?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
I mean, interestingly, art galleries were allowed to stay open because they are selling something. That's interesting. It's very much going on still, this debate. Of course, it always depends on where the infection numbers are. So right now they're so high that I think nobody's really crazy about visiting a museum right now, but I would say like a month ago or 6 weeks ago, or actually when our second lockdown started in November, early November, and at the beginning of that, you know, some people thought, you know, why do we have to close museums, but department stores are open? And I don't really have an answer for it. I mean, I don't really like to go to a shop if I don't have to, and I also wouldn't like to go to a museum if I don't have to. But there's also a bit of a it's kind of hard to say. I mean, and you know, I don't really have a firm opinion on that. There is like an element of kitsch in that, sort of you know, this kind of pathos around art as you know, I can't live without art. Of course, right. You can live without art, or if you don't, nobody has to go to a museum. So there's a bit of a it's hard to sort of pin down, but there is something kind of you know, overly self-important in this debate or in the criticism of some of these people. There was an article in our paper just the other day quoting somebody, I don't remember whom, from a theater in Berlin, saying, you know, this is like a crime against humanity or something, you know, depriving people of theater. Nobody can live without theater. It's bullshit. I mean, people can very well live without theater. And it's also, and there's something cynical about it too, because there are so many bigger problems. And, you know, if we think about the nurses or whatever who are struggling in hospitals. So I can't really give you an answer.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, you know, there were many attempts to sort of raise the importance of artists and art in the public debate, but sometimes it really just went too far. And
right.
Sorry.
I think I understand what you mean. Obviously, we can do without it. If it means that not doing without it, it means that we need to put our lives at risk in order to go and to fill a theater to watch a performance. If that means that we might, you know, increase the risk of spreading the virus, of course you can do without the theater performance. I think I understand what you mean. At the same time, that we're missing something critical. That we're missing something critical during this period.
Yeah.
And I give you an example, and maybe you can speak to this a bit more too, but I teach this course this semester, which it's online. Our courses at the University of Texas, like most universities and colleges across North America, are being taught online. It's a film noir class, crime pictures, crime movies of the 1940s and 50s. You can teach a class like this online without, actually it turned out to be much, I was worried it was going to be an absolute fiasco, but no, you can do it. What's missing entirely though, to all the panelists here, is the human experience of watching those movies together. We would, in a course taught normally, we would fill an auditorium or a screening room and we would watch these films together. And that may seem like a banal or insignificant aspect, but it's a pretty huge one when you think about it. And so that is something, yeah.
Of course, I mean, I would love to go to a movie theater again.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's, you know, Netflix is just as good, not at all. But do you really want to say we should open all these places, even though there are going to be people infected? Or is it better to say no, we don't? You know, of course, everybody's missing the arts and culture. I mean, that's not the issue. The question is, do you really want to push it? And of course, it sort of also intersects with basically capitalism. If you close a store, then these people are going to lose their jobs eventually, or the government has to pay for it. Whereas the museum is subsidized anyway, so nobody's losing their jobs. It just goes on for those people in Germany.
Yeah, and I was going to say that's definitely specific to Germany, and but that is a good point. There have been a number of questions that have come in on the Q&A, and if you don't mind, we have maybe 10 more minutes. So I want to just see if I can take up some of those and point them to you. So there was one that came in early on for you, Marion, asking whether as a writer you feel pressure to work the pandemic into your writing these days. So you mentioned the short story that you finished recently. I've seen this among some of my colleagues who are screenwriters and also, you know, writers and novelists. I know that there has been this tendency to address the pandemic. Have you felt that yourself, or is this something that was no? Okay.
Not at all. So I know there are colleagues that they're writing novels or short stories based on the pandemic. What I did, what was really interesting and kind of surreal, I did a voiceover for a series for I think Amazon Prime. It was the subject was about a pandemic, so that was my job to do. It was about a deadly pandemic, and I did the radio, the news voice. But besides, no, I know that some publishing houses said we don't want to have your stories on the pandemic. We won't publish them. Maybe in 10 years, but not right now. There will be a flood of stories about this, but I don't care. It's not my subject. No.
Well, there is what they call now the COVID fatigue, right? We're so tired. And this has also prompted all sorts of different responses, not just among publishers, but also among how people respond to daily life, and sometimes make decisions that perhaps they shouldn't make just because they're so sick of it all, so fed up. There was a question that also came up in the Q&A, and this is posed, I think, to all the panelists, which is namely, knowing what we now know, would there be anything that you would do differently toward the beginning of the pandemic? You know, when we started in February, March for you, I think even as early as February for us, really hit around the second week of March. But are there things that you've learned that now, if were you to face it again, you would do things any differently? Are there, I guess the question also seems to anticipate lessons that we've learned from this now 9 months into this, you know, 3/4 of a year into this. Nobody wants to take a stab at that one. Go ahead, Jörg. You seem to.
I mean, it has nothing to do with my work or with arts or whatever. I just would have gone out more, to the countryside in nature when the sun was still shining and the days were long. And now I was wondering. Now I'm wondering what I did in April, June, May. What was I actually doing? I mean, the time just went by. I have no memory even of what I was doing then.
Right.
So I regret that a little bit.
And we have dark and cold months now ahead of us. I think this is going to be perhaps the hardest part of it all. Here in Austin, thankfully, there are a lot of outdoor venues because it's quite mild compared to, say, the East Coast or to Europe. But I know it's hard to do much outdoors. Say that again?
It's snowing in
Munich. In Munich, and even the outdoor activities, I think I read a piece over the weekend about whether or not in the Alps, whether they'll be able to open up, skiing and things like that, because you're shaking your head. That seemed to be the message in the piece I read in the Times over the weekend too, is that there's some in Austria, I guess there are a few renegades who want to open up, that you were talking moments ago about the capitalist implications of decisions we make. That might be another case where capitalism will determine the ultimate decision. Look, we have a little bit more time. There is a question, another anonymous question that came up in the Q&A, and it goes as follows. So much about making art is to process, to transform, to reflect the world in new, interesting, and challenging ways. Do you think that is even possible at this present moment where we are still in the middle of this? When do you think will be possible to retrospect or to look back on what this pandemic has actually done to us as a society? Whew, that's an easy question. Who wants to respond to that one? I think we're going to be processing this for a long, long time, is my sense. I think that you panelists should maybe take a swat at it. I have friends who work in the corporate sector in New York City, and that's an area where they've also, I think it will forever change, just on a very basic, and this is true perhaps in Berlin and Munich, Vienna, elsewhere, the office culture, the people who used to go regularly to the office. Jörg, you mentioned you've been back, I think, 2 or 3 times to the Süddeutsche since this took place. Even once we have a vaccine and things are looking on the up and up, I'm curious whether people will actually go back to offices and work the way that they once did. It seems that universities were beginning to also, not just in the corporate world, but in the world of higher education, looking into different ways in which people can now telecommute, since we've spent so much time doing that during this pandemic. People, doing their classes and their meetings and everything on Zoom. Do you have some thoughts on that? It's COVID fatigue. Zoom fatigue and COVID fatigue come together. Go ahead, Jörg. You seem to want to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I don't think it will, at least in Germany, it won't. I don't think it will have such a huge lasting impact, to be honest. I mean, it sounds sort of strange maybe, but I mean, in a few months, the vaccine will be there, and then it will sort of peter out, and then there's just so much government money being sort of washed over the system that I think, the restaurants, they're all closed since 2 months, since 1 month. They get 75% of what they made last year, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
They all survive, and I don't think it'll have such a huge impact.
Mm-hmm.
I think people will start flying again, and people will go to offices again. I mean, maybe a little less, but I don't think the world will be completely different afterwards.
Yeah.
Even the things that we would like to be different, I think they won't be. It'll all be a little more sort of hesitant, maybe, but not as exuberant. But I don't think it'll be fundamentally different.
We continue to greet each other with our elbows instead of our hands. Will that go on? Sorry, Marion, you were saying something?
Yeah, people forget,
Yeah, I know.
Out of sight, out of mind,
Yeah.
Once the vaccine is there and everybody is, like we had in summer, everybody was moving and was, it was like before, almost.
Right.
And it still is in a way here. So this is sad in a way. So we don't keep it in mind.
Yeah. I think you may be right. There's time perhaps for one final quick question. We have just a couple more minutes, but there's one for you, Anne, if that's okay, which was asking you to tell us more about how you're working with your film team on the news documentary you mentioned before. So could you just talk about the sort of the way that one conducts a film production in the age of COVID? Did you want to maybe say a word or two about that?
Habe ich es richtig verstanden? Entschuldigung.
Ja, nee, kein Problem.
Wie überhaupt Film, wie Drehen jetzt geht in Deutschland. Also so,
Ganz
wie
genau.
wir das machen.
In Bezug auf den neuen Film jetzt.
It's very, my own film is ready, is finished, because and I mixed it and it was at home. It was not, I have had no problems with rules, but in the other films I produced now, it's very difficult for all filmmakers, but for me and my production, film production too. And I shoot 2 documentaries now, and one is a very international film documentary in Australia, in United States, in Great Britain, and France, and so on, and it's not possible to shoot. It's not possible to shoot. We have a little part in this story. It is in Germany. It plays in Germany. We can shoot it, and we shoot in Germany, but we can't shoot. And the other film is it's very we shoot, but we have to. Wir müssen diese Regeln beachten. Wie sagt man?
Yeah, they have to pay attention to the protocol, safety protocols, and the rules and
it's very cheap, and it's very, it's very hard. For the team and for the protagonist or actors too, and for all people of all heads of department.
Right. it sounds like for post-production, you were describing post-production you can do because you do that by yourself and that's not the problem. But to do
no, not I have to go in the studio, but it's possible. It's big rooms, and we
wear masks.
We look for rules, but it's okay for me, and it's okay for us. It's not like Jörg said. It's not the biggest problem. I think we can do it. We can. Wir können damit umgehen. Wie sagt man? Wir müssen damit umgehen.
We have to somehow tolerate and get on with it.
Yes, Noah. Yes, is it the answer of the question?
Yeah, I think you did a great job. That's a spectacular answer, Anne. Well done. Well done. And look, let me thank all of you. We just hit the mark where I think we've been asked to wrap things up, because there's another panel, if you can believe it, in just 45 minutes from now. So I wanted to thank you, Liana, of course, and Sarah for the wonderful, generous invitation, bringing us all together. And I feel very, very fortunate to have played a small part in just helping the conversation, steering it along. It was a real pleasure meeting all of you, and I hope that the audience enjoyed hearing your passionate and insightful responses.
Thank you so much, Noah. Thank you, Anne, Marion, Florian, Jörg. Thanks to the audience. Thank you, Sarah. We've heard quite a spectrum of observations covering film, photography, literature, journalism, general thoughts about what is essential, what is not essential, what is perhaps to be reconsidered in terms of how governments or city governments handle what they consider important and how they support artists and the arts. And obviously there are no easy answers. And yes, you can survive without theater, you can survive without literature, but of course in the end, yes, I agree with that, but I'd like to go to the movies, and I hope at some point I can go again. But of course, in the meantime, it's smarter not to go. But then, when I watch my movies here on the little computer screen, I get so miserable about all the stuff I miss and about the shared communal experience. And I think we're all in our living rooms now, and we tend to be in our homes since we're not essential workers. I feel like that's a certain sense of isolation, and communicating with each other via Zoom and phone is nice, and I'm glad we have that. But I do feel that we're all deprived of that communal feeling, and it is not perhaps essential for surviving, but it is of course essential for the benefit of our spirit in the long run. And so what I'm trying to say in a very convoluted way, it's hard to negotiate what is essential and not essential. And I'm grateful that I can work from home mostly, and I'm grateful that I'm not pushed into the subway more often, and I'm grateful for the people who, however, work in the hospitals and take care of people and stock the grocery stores, but I miss the good stuff. So there's no easy answer. But I thank you all for sharing your thoughts and bringing up good questions. And I'm also glad that Marion, you brought up the whole extreme responses on the extreme sides, the right-wing madness that we see growing in both countries, in the US, in Germany, also in Austria. And I'm saying Austria because Florian is originally from Austria. So we cover 3 countries amongst the 6 that we are here. And there are a lot of things to worry about. There are things to be hopeful for. And if you want to worry more, join us for our next panel on the rise of the far right at 3 p.m. And again, thank you so much for joining. And it was lovely to see you all, my good friends. Have a nice evening, afternoon, and hopefully see you again soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bleibt gesund.
Ja, selber auch. Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.